Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about the Italian High Renaissance, chapter 22, getting ready for our exam soon. This is an exciting chapter because we're going down to Rome soon. We're going to start with Da Vinci up north, but he will travel to Rome, and then we'll get to Raphael and Michelangelo. So the early Italian Renaissance pretty much stays in Florence, and we see the Medici family rising to power and wealth and commissioning a lot of works, and that will continue when they driven out of Florence, and they will come down to Rome, and eventually a Medici will become Pope, and so we'll have a big powerhouse happening. We start with Leonardo da Vinci, who works mostly in Florence and Milan, but he does come to Rome. He goes to Paris. He works all over the place. He's a painter, a sculptor, an architect, a scientist, and an engineer. This is what we call a Renaissance man. A Renaissance man is somebody who's good at everything, and certainly he was very interested in everything. So this is his self-portrait. He did a lot of drawings. He kept a lot of sketchbooks. He has dozens of sketchbooks with hundreds and hundreds of drawings of everything you can imagine. He studied everything. He studied architecture. He tried to make all kinds of inventions as far as machinery. And this is his flying machine here in the center. That was one of his obsessions. He has several versions of this. He really wanted to make something fly. So a man way ahead of his time. And on the right, that is different drawings of catapults. He actually built several catapults for different kings. He was sort of a gun for hire, going around designing these things and helping build them. So for protection and weaponry. And the odd thing about his sketchbooks is they are written from right to left. And the possible reason is Da Vinci was being secretive. You'd have to hold it into a mirror to read what it said. You couldn't just steal his ideas outright. He loved to study anatomy. He went to the morgue to study corpses, and he was very interested in trying to see how the skeletal system worked and how the brain worked, reproduction, even though he got it a little bit wrong here. He was fascinated by how everything ran, real machines, human machines, or whatnot. He illustrated this, and Da Vinci always gets the credit for this type of drawing. This is pretty famous. It's called the Vitruvian Man, and that's because it is based on Vitruvius, an ancient Roman architect and artist who wrote books about the proportions of human form, but really his writings are based on ancient Greek proportions. So the Renaissance filters through, uh, you know, the Romans to get the Greek stuff. And soon other people will filter through the Renaissance to get Greek stuff as well. So, this saying in ancient Greece is man is the measure of all things. The Greeks, as you probably know, are obsessed with perfection, mathematics, and ideal proportions. So, we have the circle and the square. Two perfect shapes, and then we have the perfect proportions are based on arm and leg length, both in a square, reaching side to side, and in a circle, reaching like in a V shape. So Da Vinci does this drawing, and this is the most reproduced version of this, even though he didn't come up with it. He was just fascinated with it. And I just put this in here for fun. One of his other obsessions is he wanted to um, make a 40-foot bronze sculpture of a horse for the Duke of Milan, but it never came to fruition. As for painting, he did many paintings. Many of them are unfinished. Um, this is Madonna of the Rocks, and we have Madonna here, and in Italian, Madonna is my lady, and the lady is Mary. Mary usually wears her blue color. So we have Mary and an angel, and we have Saint John the Baptist and Jesus. And they sit in a triangle shape, and this is something that many Renaissance artists use. because it is a very stable shape. It creates stability, rationality. It's based on a perfect form. And these are, Greek things coming back, being reborn in the Renaissance. The other thing Da Vinci is known for in painting is this sfumato. Sfumato means smoky in Italian, and that is his brushstroke style. We'll get to the Impressionists. They used like little tiny brushstrokes. Um, Da Vinci liked to use almost like a fan brush. He kind of feathered everything in there, so it created this sort of haziness. Not exactly atmospheric perspective, because he does use that. You can see back here. Um, Lots of artists using atmospheric perspective. He would use it even on the foreground. You could see every hair on the heads. It's very textural. He also left a lot of unfinished work, which is great for art history because we know exactly what he was doing as far as his process. So here we have, an under drawing. We see the drawing thing, and then we have part of the under painting, the grisaille, the black and white paint. And then he would start adding the layers of color and then eventually the glazing. So we know exactly how he would have done it. And lots of artists do this kind of process, still do it. And this is a close-up of Madonna of the Rocks, just to see that sfumato. You see like this little baby, like every little hair on his head. Of course, his most famous painting, or the most famous painting, I should say, is the Mona Lisa. And there's not much to say about it. This is an unfinished painting um, that Leonardo is said to have kept in his own possession his whole life. He never gave it to the husband of Lisa, who commissioned him to paint her portrait. Um, she seems to be in some mysterious landscape. Lots of people think it's a mystery who she is. There's lots of conspiracies about, and I've heard like this is Da Vinci's self portrait or whatever. This is an actual woman. There's documentation, and her husband paid to have her come and sit and have her portrait done. So there's no mystery as far as that is. But this smoky atmospheric perspective, this sfumato, we have the triangle composition, and probably she's most famous for this enigmatic, strange smile on her face. It's probably the most famous smile in the world. But really, it is an unfinished painting. And I don't overteach the Mona Lisa because she doesn't do a lot in art history to stand out. She has become a legend and icon all by herself at the Louvre in Paris. Uh, that has really nothing to do with art history. It's probably most famous because Leonardo's paintings don't often leave Italy. Um, so here we have a finished Leonardo painting. You can see how fine and linear his style is. So you can see maybe he didn't get to finish this. You can see the hair is almost transparent. It seems to be an underpainting compared to this painting here. The painting we really do want to focus on for Da Vinci is The Last Supper because it has all the bells and whistles of the Renaissance. Remember, the Renaissance is this rebirth of all things classical and Greco-Roman. We have education, we have literature, we have science, we have thinking. Um, and philosophy can't be underestimated as something that is very important in the Renaissance. This idea that man has to start thinking about what makes a good life, what makes a good person. This is what philosophy does. So man questioning things. How do we act and react in this world? And that really is what philosophy is, the questioning of this man's place. And so Da Vinci here shows the Last Supper. And first, let's deal with real space, man's place in the world. This other idea of like creating a realistic, naturalistic space in painting has been developing a while. And we've seen one point perspective already invented by Brunelleschi in the last chapter, used by Masaccio and other artists. So Da Vinci would have been well aware of this, as he was a student of Perugino, so he knew perspective. So here we have this triangle format here, and we have all of the vanishing lines connecting right at Christ's head. And then behind Christ's head is the window so that he's glowing as if a halo. And now the doorways, everything leads to Christ. So this is symbolic and it's realistic space. And it's very clever to use this. And we kind of saw that with Dirk Bouts as well um, in another chapter. Let me just go to that one. This one here. Remember, Dirk Bouts used perspective lines to go to Christ, but the bottom didn't really line up. He flips the table up so we can see what's going on at the Last Supper. So he uses perspective in an odd way to sort of show the scene. And then we saw this crazy one here where Judas is put on the outside so that you could tell who's separate, who's going to be the culprit. But what Da Vinci does is he uses these, he puts everybody on one side of the table and then he uses Christ as the vanishing point. Like I'll just go back because I missed this slide. This is in situ, which means in where it belongs. This is where it was painted, and we have this, larger than life scene. This is a refectory. This would have been the dining hall for the monks who paid for this, and every night they would go in and symbolically take part in the Last Supper. They would be renewing their, faith every night. Christ died for their sins, etc., etc. Using one point perspective, that's part of the Renaissance. And then this idea of man questioning, acting, and reacting in realistic space. So we have all of these figures. The Last Supper scene is Christ has just said, "One of you will betray me." And he sits here in a stable format, calmly, as they all have their own individual human reactions to this news. And Da Vinci was very good at studying individual, facial expressions and anatomy. His training at the morgue pays off, and he makes separate portraits of each of these individuals reacting. And he shows Judas in shadow. Everybody else has light hitting their face. So that's our first tip off. The second tip off is Judas reaches for a plate of bread, as does Christ. I don't know if I can see that hand here. So they're reaching from the same plate. That's the Bible says that Christ eats off the plate of the traitor, and that's what Da Vinci is showing there. He's also broken up all of the groupings into threes. So he has this four groups of three. So we got this sort of mathematical thing happening. We got six on one half, six on the other, Christ in the middle. So the whole thing is very cleverly composed. Here's the last three. And that's the word refectory is the word for the dining hall in Milan where this still is. So it has everything of the Renaissance. It has one point perspective, it has humanism, etc. And it's not in great shape. As you can see, everything's peeling off. Da Vinci was very creative with his technique. He liked to experiment with things. He was a little obsessed with the oil painting of the North when he went up north. And he's trying to do it with plaster. And it doesn't always work that way. It gets really messy. And of course, things drip and stuff like that. So it wasn't even in good shape by the time he finished it. It's been kept up for a long time. All right, over to Raphael, who is the youngest of the three that we look in this chapter. You can see he died a relatively young man. He comes from Urbino, but he moves down to Rome and he paints for the Pope. And he has several other very expensive commissions. He is a student of Perugino. And this actually looks a lot like a Perugino. Sorry, this should not say giving of the keys. That is the Perugino painting. It should say the birth of the marriage of the Virgin Mary and Joseph getting married here. And you can recall, hopefully, Peruginos had this almost exact building, like a baptistry, with two Roman triumphal arches on the sides. So Raphael's sort of quoting him on this with the all the vanishing lines leading to the middle of the doorway, just like Perugino's. All the main players right up front, and possibly even some of those little cartoon images in the middle. Raphael had seen Da Vinci's Madonna of the Rocks and his underpainting, and he was very influenced by Da Vinci. He loved his work, and we quickly see him adapting his style from the Northern Perugino to a more solid form. You can see he's also doing the triangle format here. So Madonna scenes, he sees what Da Vinci is doing and he wants to steal the subject, but lots of people are painting these. These are very popular to buy and be commissioned. Um, and he steals the format as well. And you can see all of this atmospheric perspective, but Raphael does not take on this sfumato quality. He has a very linear quality. You can see almost every little line and detail in his paintings. And these were very popular. He painted many Madonna scenes. So again, Madonna is Mary, and usually with Christ, and a lot of times in the Renaissance, he's shown with his cousin, St. John the Baptist. And Raphael's very good at painting realistic babies, which we've seen some very awkward babies in art history. This is his Sistine Madonna because this is in the Sistine Chapel. Um, And really, this is probably the most famous part of that. I've seen this in many posters, reproduce these little cherub babies who look like they're kind of thinking, but they're very realistic looking babies. I mean, even this baby Christ is very, very realistic. Over to the Stanza della Signatura in the Vatican, which is the Pope's private residence, and it is a library. And the Pope asks Raphael to paint the library, which he does. And down the hall, around the corner, Michelangelo is painting the Sistine ceiling at the same time. This is the School of Athens. This is a quintessential, just like the Last Supper, has all the bells and whistles of the Italian Renaissance. We have the one-point perspective, where all points lead to behind these two figures' heads here. We have a triangular composition. We have all the Greek and Roman things being reborn, all the Roman togas, the Greek and Roman philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, etc. We have the sculptures, the ancient sculptures. So it's like walking back in time, right? Except for the Romans never made paintings like this. You can tell it looks like a Roman play in the Italian Renaissance because of the one-point perspective. So in the middle of the painting are supposed to be Plato and Aristotle, who had opposing philosophies for what was important in life. Aristotle believed that there was an upper realm, almost like your soul. You should live according to what's going to happen after your life. And then Plato believed in what is down here. So they point up and down. What happens in your life here on Earth is what you should be paying attention to. I guess we'd say now you should be present. All right. So they have opposing views, and they are shown here, pointing to where their views are, right there in the middle of the painting. This figure here is a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci himself. Raphael very much admired him. And then we have all of these figures. We have this figure here doing his math. This is Pythagoras. Um, it's also thought to be Bramante, who is the last artist we'll look at in this chapter today. And then peeking here over in between all these people is Raphael himself. This is a self-portrait of Raphael. So we're having all these Renaissance people appearing in the oops, in the School of Athens. So we have Da Vinci, we have Raphael, we have Bramante, we have plenty of other figures playing other roles. And then we have this figure all by himself, brooding here in the middle, with his face in shadow. And this is Michelangelo himself. It's said that this was painted later, um, after Raphael finished most of this. He reapplied plaster and painted this guy in. And it's probably because Michelangelo would not have enjoyed this painting, and or this part of the painting with himself brooding all by himself. So Raphael was probably being a little sneaky here. They were very competitive with each other, and they did not have a lot of love for each other. So these are truly all of the people from, ancient Greece that would have been reborn in the Renaissance, so to speak, through all their writings, philosophy, etc. The whole idea of education is part of humanism as well. And I always say, well, the church is opening the floodgates for um, independent thinking, and they might live to regret that in the next chapter. All right, so this has perspective, humanism, etc. And then this is Raphael's portrait of Julius II. There's a Pope, one of Pope Leo the Fifth in your textbook as well. He painted the popes all in their beautiful velvety red robes. He was incredibly good at painting texture, as you can see in this is one of my favorite portraits here. Um, this velvet coat is just so tactile. He's just amazing. Unfortunately, Raphael did die very young. He was nicknamed Beloved, the Beloved. He was the beloved of the Pope. And he was so beloved that he was allowed to be buried in the Pantheon, that famous Roman building in Rome, the circular one with the dome. Other people are buried there, but not many. This is the first time an artist had been. On to Michelangelo. This is his sculpture Pieta, the Pieta. A Pieta is the scene where Mary holds the body of Christ after he has been taken off the cross. And this is a scene that you've seen before if you were in 114. This is a way of showing this scene, part of Christ's life and death, the cycle. And this sculpture Michelangelo did when he was only 23 years old. And he was criticized for a couple things, but really, I think everybody thought it was just totally amazing that he could do this with marble. Marble is, um, you know, you have to sort of, as Michelangelo said, release the sculpture. You have to envision three-dimensionally what it's going to look like, because if you carve out too much of something, you're going to waste quite a bit of money. So it's one of the hardest things to deal with. So here we have Mary holding Jesus, and Mary is said to look very, very young. She looks very large compared to Christ, and he seems to have a little bit of muscle tone, as if he's flexing his muscles. He doesn't, like this muscle here, he doesn't quite look dead yet. And this was a little discerning, but of course, people greatly admired how beautiful this painting was. And you can see the scale of this one is totally off as well. So this is a thing the Germans like to show, the Pieta. This is a scene that has been sculpted many times. So Michelangelo comes and he lives in Rome. And while he's in Rome, he sees this sculpture, which is a Greek Hellenistic sculpture. Which was a Roman copy of a Greek Hellenistic sculpture, I should say, that was unearthed. It was excavated in Rome while Michelangelo was there, and he went to see this, and it sort of blew his mind. He changed his style. He started making much more muscular figures, and he started making nudes as well. So this is, we don't really need to study this. If you took 114, you know all about this. Is a story from the Trojan War and the Iliad, um, where Laocoon is going to warn Troy about the horse, and he gets killed by serpents for doing so, and so do his little sons there. So Michelangelo takes this kind of, muscular, um, buff kind of figure style, and he starts using it himself. So this is our third, I should say, David. We saw the Donatello, and we saw the Verrocchio. Hopefully, you can recall Donatello's was a young boy. He is shown with his helmet relaxing after he has already slain the giant. And here we have Michelangelo's gigantic David up here on um, his podium, and it's the same scene. It's This is in Florence. Um, this is a different moment though. So this was made to sit on top of a building, but they decided that it was so good that they needed to put it in the town square. Now you can see from this, it has been taken from the town square and put in the museum. Um, but there's a copy outside in the town square that lots of people go and take pictures of and probably don't even realize that's not the real David. So here we have the David with his um, very sort of look on his face. He's concentrating, and you can see he's in his contrapposto. So with one leg relaxed, he is holding the slingshot over his back. And you have to look closely to see that he is holding the stone in his hand. This is the moment of the story before he does anything. He is just standing there, waiting, looking off in the distance, probably, thinking about how is he going to get this job done? How is he going to do this great feat? Oh, there's the one outside. And the proportions are a little off because Michelangelo did intend for this to be seen from street level. Right, so nobody would have even seen this part of it, but he did sculpt it, and you can see the slingshot here that he's holding, and you can kind of see the stone here or here. And so this makes a good comparison. This is, there's the stone. This is, the moment before. He is, whoops, let me go back. He is a thinking individual who is about to act, based on his thoughts. So there's our philosophy. And then he still represents this idea of Florence defeating the giant, right? The Duke of Milan, or King Lansdowne is the next threat against Florence. So it's still the same symbolism as far as using the David. Um, and he, of course, picks up where Donatello left off. It is a male nude, like the male nude comes back into vogue. That can't be underestimated as a thing that is part of the Renaissance. Um, Michelangelo was asked to come to Rome and work on the tomb of Julius II, the Pope. And it was never completed because the Pope soon changed his mind and wanted Michelangelo to go over to the Sistine Chapel and start painting that instead. So he never really finished it. This is um, on the upper right part of this drawing here, would be where um, this sculpture, the Moses, would have gone. This is one of my favorite Michelangelos. You see here Moses with his horns, just a mistranslation from a Hebrew text where horns and rays, it's supposed to be rays of lights. Somebody mistranslated, and most likely artists just started giving Moses horns for some reason. And we can see almost a direct quotation of that Laocoon Greek sculpture I showed you. And ironically, this Moses looks a lot like Michelangelo himself. You see the big, giant proportions. This looks a lot like, Raphael's Michelangelo in the School of Athens. And these are just some other parts of the tomb that are unfinished. So Michelangelo is asked to go around the corner and paint the ceiling of this. This is the Sistine Chapel in Vatican. This is going to be St. Peter's here, which Michelangelo will redesign. We're actually looking down from the dome here. So here we're just looking at this angle. Michelangelo later will design this whole thing, St. Peter's, and then we'll see this part of it done in the Baroque time period. But here we go inside the Sistine ceiling. And when we talk about Michelangelo's work, we talk about all of this, all of these things, some of these things. These paintings are not his. And then later on, he'll do this part, the Last Judgment. So he goes and he starts doing this program. He's told, you're going to do the Old Testament. And so he has to come up with a way to make this whole thing look like all different segments. And what he does is he uses real architecture and fake architecture to divide everything into parts of the story. Just to show you, there's Perugino's painting right there. This is the giving of the keys to St. Peter's, Raphael's teacher. And this is still a used chapel. They don't use it very often, but when they do use it, it's for things like choosing the new pope, which is what's going on with this one here. So these are all the cardinals in their red, coming and meeting and voting on a new pope. So they do this inside of the best art ever made. So it's important to note that Michelangelo knows you have to look up to see this thing. So he has to deal with, one, how to tell the story with all these segments, and two, how to make it look readable from down below on the ground. So he has to deal with perspective, real perspective, and point of view. So he divides everything up into segments and he creates these false triangle architectural things. These are also false things that he'll paint. And then he tells part of the story on the sides of the walls. So we have, different, the middle part is Adam and Eve and then the creation. And you can see here, God creating is the middle of the whole chapel. So here's all the ways that he divides them. Here's all the triangles. And then all of these sculptures and architectural things are fake. He's divided them with things that look so three-dimensional as if they're really there. This is the first part that he starts with here. And he's said to have stopped and gone down to the floor and looked up and decided that it's not going to work. It's too small. He doesn't paint over it though. He leaves it as is. And he just readjusts as he goes so that it's more readable from below. So that's the first phase there. And then this is the second phase. He's making fewer figures, right? He was trying to do like a whole landscape here. You can't really see here as a boat and a whole bunch, dozens of people here. He realized nobody's going to be able to see all that. Why am I bothering to paint every single one of these individuals where it looks like a blur from the ground? Here you can see it better here. So he decides he needs to bump up his scale and simplify the story a little bit. So here's one of the scenes. This is the separation of water, just to show you his amazing foreshortening. That's not in your book. This is the separation from light to darkness. You see God here. Literally, there's the light, there's the shadow on this side. He's separating them. And then it's like a split screen. He's like floating away here, which is a very odd way to show God, the bottoms of his feet and his backside. But again, the face is very similar to Michelangelo himself and to the Moses. And here's the center, the culmination of everything, the creation scene. This is the most famous part of the whole ceiling, where God touches Adam and infuses life into him. You can see he looks very listless. He doesn't have any energy. He's about to get that infused into him. And then this is the both the temptation and the expulsion scene of Adam and Eve. We see this big, massive figure of Adam, and then we have the snake wrapped all around. Snake is always a female. And then we have the angel, very similar to Giotto's expulsion or Masaccio's expulsion, coming in and kicking them out. And then inside of all these little architectural things, he fills them with all kinds of Greek and Roman characters, prophets, sibyls, and ignudi. Ignudis are nudes, these little things. And this is one of the sibyls from your textbook, the Libyan Sibyl. And sibyls are seers in the ancient world. They're people, they're prophets. They're people who tell the future. And this one here, we have the drawing of Michelangelo. We know that he used male models. He had to use male models. You could not be a woman alone with an artist if you were a model. The only way you would model for somebody is if you had a rich husband who would pay for your portrait to be, or if you were a queen, to pay for your portrait to be made, and then you would have your handmaidens and all your chaperones with you. You would never be allowed to dare show even like a shoulder out in public. So this is one reason why all his females look so male-like. And here's probably a more famous one. Delphi, the Sibyl from Delphi was the famous one that was on the island of Delphi. You could go and visit. It was like a no war zone. All countries sort of respected the Delphi, the famous prophet. So here we have all of these, you know, um, Raphael's painting all these Greek figures in the School of Athens, and then we have Michelangelo using his Greek figures on the ceiling. All these pagan or pantheistic religions showing up in the most holy place that Catholics have. The restoration is something that happened in the um, 80s to the Sistine ceiling. They decided to clean it, and lots of you wrote very interesting things about this. I enjoyed reading your opinions about this. It's quite a thing in art history to know what's what. Um, I don't think any of you mentioned this, but Michelangelo goes to paint the Sistine ceiling. It's already painted. The Pope has him paint over it. It's not a mural, but it's like the Arena Chapel with blue and medallions with stars, but somebody had painted it. So he actually painted over somebody else's painting to do that, and he'll paint over the wall to do the Last Judgment. The Pope will decide he wants a different painting there. So um, it doesn't just happen with restoration; it happens with artists and commissions as well. And this is just something I like to show because this is a painting, a tondo, that Michelangelo did. It's not a fresco on a wall, but we can see this didn't have to be restored. These are the colors that he would have used, whatever the argument for having glazing that makes it look darker. Paintings that have been well kept that are not on a fresco um, do have the same colors as the restoration. Michelangelo was an architect as well. He was asked to design the new St. Peter's. They took down the old one, built a new one. And what he does is he looks at what Bramante is doing with this Greek cross plan and decides, well, we got a square and a circle put together, two beautiful, perfect shapes. Yes, I know you're thinking of the Vitruvian Man right away. The perfect proportions for a building must be the perfect proportions for a human. This is all things Greek, coming back in Greek architecture. Remember, the whole Gothic age had the Greek, the Latin cross plan. This is the Greek cross plan. So this is St. Peter's, but this is what Michelangelo creates. So this is the dome that goes over it. He creates the dome, and these are all the little radiating chapels around the central plan. It's just beautiful. This dome is amazing. So it kind of looks like the stars, the medallions that Italians like to put on chapels. And this is what the inside of the dome looks like. It has an oculus, this round thing. We saw Matanya paint a fake one. And then it has all these windows with their little pediments, very Greek looking. And yes, the US Capitol building looks a lot like that. I always like this picture because I think, oh, the if you want to see all the buildings, you can go and you can see the Parthenon, you could see the Roman architecture. Those are all just in Washington, D.C. And then this is Bramante. This is the guy who was playing the role of Pythagoras in Raphael's painting. This is his central plan, little tiny, beautiful, perfect chapel, Tempietto. It's almost exactly the same, but this is just a freestanding little, almost like a little birthday cake or something standing in Rome. All right, so for the test, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to have the Venetians on the test. I'll write an email about it or an announcement, and then use this as your study guide. And I will make a video on how to take the exam. I'll post that tomorrow. The test will open on Wednesday. Thanks.